And we're back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Majid Sadegpour. He's the political director, and Dr. Ramesh Separad, advisory board chairman of the Organization of Iranian American Communities. Dr. Sadegpour, we've been hearing a lot in Canada about foreign agents, including Iranian foreign agents, interfering with Canadian politics, not only in the diaspora, but certainly a lot of the focus is there. There are now reports, I'm sure you're well aware of these, that the recent pro-Hamas, anti-Jewish protests that surrounded the visit by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to Washington might have been funded and supported by the regime in Iran. I'm wondering whether you could give us a little bit of perspective on what you've been following about this foreign interference by Iran in North America.
Of course. Thank you, Tony. I will defer a portion of this to Ramesh. I think it's a part of our expertise. But having said that, let me say briefly, the Iran's influence operation in the West has been very, very extensive, and it has proliferated in an environment that we have called appeasement, where the Western world has tried to change the regime's behavior, whereas the Iranian people want to change the regime itself in its entirety. So that dichotomy has led to the regime establishing an enormous web of influence in the Western Hemisphere, certainly across Europe and in the United States and Canada, to where it has successfully exerted significant policy influences, at a minimum created inertias to supporting democratic change in Iran. But the narrative is changing. I'll point to the Canadian action to designate the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization. Well, a long time coming, but by God, I am so glad that in fact that's a reality. I think that will be seen, it will be reflecting in the weakness, furthering the weakness of the regime. It will empower the people of Iran, just as the U.S.'s action to designate the IRGC was. So Iran's influence operation, and I might add one of the examples you did not mention is their plan to influence the U.S. elections in the upcoming elections,
right,
in favoring one candidate versus the other. So, but having said that, I'll stop there and I'll let Ramesh add on there, because I know her expertise is much more expensive than mine.
Please, yes, Ramesh. Yeah.
So I think Majid kind of talked about the big picture. Influence operation for Iran, even though we are now seeing more evidence of it in cyberspace, has been there from day one. It began during the 1980s as they tried to demonize the opposition, as they tried to demonize the peaceful protesters in Iran who were seeking democracy, particularly the National Council of Resistance and the MEK, and it evolved over time. That particular influence operation, now we're seeing online, has gone beyond just targeting the main opposition, and now it's evolved to surveillance. It has evolved to really muddying the water for political purposes and political gain, so that they can have their the most favored candidates to be more prominent in the online discourse and the dialogue that's happening. And I think that's a real danger to democracy, no matter which country you're talking about. So I think what we need to do, as I said at the beginning, is to really deal with the head of the snake in its entirety and its totality, whether it's the influence operation online or their terrorism. I think, as Majid said, designation of the IRGC by Canadian government was mostly welcomed by people inside Iran and those of us who are striving for democracy and freedom. But that is just the starting point. I think it has to be followed by specific measures, expelling the Ministry of Intelligence, those agents that are causing and posing threat against Iranian personalities and the diaspora and the supporters of the National Council of Resistance and the MEK. This really goes back to the House Resolution 1148 when they talked about the protection of Ashraf residents too, because the regime really focuses on them to bring harm to them, to demonize them. And that's their formula. Influence operation, demonize, and then followed by terrorism. We need to break this cycle.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned that because that main refugee center in Albania, Ashraf, is constantly there are cyber attacks, there our death threats. It really is a constant drumbeat of interference by the Iranian regime. When we get back, I do want to talk again about other destabilizing initiatives by the Iranian government because it is of such importance to the peace and security of the whole world, not just Iranians.